Need to do anything about this?
No, they should be on.
Recording in progress.
Welcome to the July 9th Mattacheese Utilization Committee, and I call the meeting to order and look to do our roll call of members present and online. So Lindsay, we're going to start with you.
Lindsay Pietro, present.
Casey Schmidt, present.
Roby Whitehouse, present.
Karen Weimer present,
Barbara Lavoine, present.
and Joe.
Joe Posca, present.
All right, thank you very much, Joe. Glad to have you.
Glad to be there.
Yeah, any public comment? Any hands raised, or? We're all set?
I don't see anyone's hand raised.
Okay. So we're going to start our agenda with a committee discussion as to whether we should incorporate within the July 15th presentation that we will be doing with the public, the incorporation of the team reports. If you might all take the draft for discussion, which is the Mattacheese reuse committee, there is Teams 1 proposal on page 3.
Do you want Jeff to go over the presentation for you guys and explain it?
Sure, but I was going by the agenda, which was to how much should we incorporate the teams?
I think
And
he has
an
some
idea.
stuff in there already, and I
Yes.
think that the discussion will come out of that when he's
Okay.
giving his presentation.
All right, thank you. Jeff?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine.
Yep.
Great. We have another colleague on the call too, Jeff Fasser. And so I don't know if he's in the background and maybe could be promoted to panelist, but I think he's present with us. And then I'm accompanied by Aksa here in our office. And, we're here on behalf of Heather. You guys have been working closely with Heather Gould. Aksa and I are very familiar with the project as well, but this is the first time you're meeting us. So I'm Jeff Bagg. I'm a senior planner with BSC. Aksa is also a senior planner, and then Jeff Vassar is the vice president and oversees the entire sort of planning and landscape architecture division at BSC. So
Terrific.
we're really happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you.
Great. Yes, thanks. And so, as Kathy said, what I was hoping to do is walk through the draft presentation that we put together. The goal of that was to have it come to the committee ahead of time. You should have hopefully received it maybe on Monday afternoon. Discuss it tonight, and then talk about the facilitator's guide, which is the guide for part of the meeting next Tuesday. And so, Kathy and I spoke earlier. Either Kathy or Liam is going to share share the slides, and I'll walk through and kind of just ask for the slides to be changed. And I think the best way will be to interrupt me if you have questions on a certain slide or want to discuss something. And then finally, I believe that Heather's going to do most of the presentation on Tuesday. So my discussion of the slides will kind of just be narrative styles, just to kind of walk through what's on the slides. It won't be the formal presentation of the slides. I just wanted to kind of make sure that was clear. I'm not going to do the full presentation with you guys tonight. If you can go to the first slide, the next slide, please. So just simply kind of looking at the agenda, what we would introduce next Tuesday is there's going to be an introduction to the MUC committee, and we were anticipating potentially having someone from the MUC committee, presumably Sharon, do the first couple slides. And as I get to them, I'll talk about those slides. But that was the hope, is that someone from the MUC committee could do the first few slides, and then Heather will take over. So that'll be the committee and then the MUC process. And then the summary of the community meeting is really, the community survey is really one of the core things that we want to do with the community next Tuesday. There are some maps which kind of represent the existing conditions, and we'll discuss that. And then really the first part of the meeting Tuesday will be a relatively short presentation. We really like to try to keep these to 30 minutes or less in terms of the presentations, people sitting and listening. And then we've had great success with whoever's in the room or online would kind of break out into these small groups and have facilitated discussions. And we'll get through that tonight. Also, while people are in those small groups, we want to do some scenario planning. So, for the presentation, this will just be a brief introduction to the agenda for the night. But you can go to the next slide, please. Great. I will not go over this, but as protocol for a hybrid meeting, we'll have this moment where we'll talk about basic Zoom security. We have some protocols where if something is happening online that's inappropriate, the online folks will stop so that behind the scenes it can be worked out. If there's an individual who needs to be removed or something like that, that can all happen. And then those people will be asked to stay on, and their screen might go black. But then the meeting will resume. And so we're gonna kind of have this preface for people who are online. And this is pretty customary these days. And if you have questions, I can keep talking about it. But otherwise, we're gonna introduce just a quick Zoom security for the participants online. And then you can go to the next slide. And this is where, in our brief discussions with Kathy about the approach, this is where we would potentially have someone from Muck come up and do a brief presentation. And on the facilitator's guide, we had tentatively marked this section for 10 minutes, which is ambitious, and it's brief, but it's kind of broken up into 3 10-minute sections. So we thought the committee, Sharon in particular, did a great job presenting this to the select board. I think it was on June 3rd, but we'll need to shrink the content to fit it into the framework of the meeting. But the scope seemed important, and so the section that was highlighted are really the core things that, the topic areas that are going to get discussed. And then we put the membership on the right so that, if the person from the mock committee presenting wants to list everybody, they can, or they can just at least acknowledge the membership there. And then you can go to the next slide. What we tried to do was maintain the same content that this committee has already prepared, the same content that you presented to the select board, so that you feel comfortable presenting that same information. We didn't really make any changes, but you all did a great job of kind of explaining the learning from the knowledgeable, so the groups, and then this was the overarching timeline.
Jeff,
And
can I
yes.
stop you for 1 second? So,
Absolutely. Yep.
so the first thing was our meeting tonight was this agenda. Is that correct? So when we start the meeting on July 15th, you are is Heather doing the first part as Zoom security? I don't know where you went, but yeah.
Yeah, I would think that Heather would do the agenda, that very first slide, which is the agenda for the evening. Heather would do that and then
So
go
this
over the
is
Zoom.
the agenda for July 15th, is that correct?
Yes.
That's correct, yes.
All right, thank you.
And I would guess that Heather would do that, and Heather would cover the Zoom security and then hand it over to you as the chair of the committee
Okay.
to run through. I think it's the next 3 slides that are
Thank you.
related to the mock
Yep.
process.
Right,
And then just noteworthy, because we're limited with the amount of time, it's really the attention span that we see for people.
right.
This slide would allow you to discuss the brainstorming and the 3 ideas, kind of that process, that the starting big with a lot of ideas and condensing it down, the reconciliation phase, and explain the groups who are involved. And then it was shift to the next slide. Liam, if you can change to the next slide. And then kind of really condensing down to how those teams got to the one proposal, on 2 levels, kind of that idea. And really what I did to really maintain the integrity of your previous presentation, I just kind of took these screenshots from that just to have you all be comfortable with that information's already been prepared. You guys already reviewed it. And so that would give you a few minutes to kind of walk through the one proposal on the 2 levels that each of these groups had come up with. And in discussing this with Kathy and Bill, they thought that the graphic on the right, the process to funnel everything down to 1 was illustrative of the process. And so I think before we shift, because I think from this slide, the next one would shift back to Heather, and Heather would start to go over some existing conditions, starting with that facility study. So, I guess I would pause here and just make sure that the committee is okay with that approach, kind of having this condensed, kind of brief introduction. And so I would look for some feedback here if that's okay.
So, any of the committee members have questions or comments in regards to any of the 3 slides that we're presenting?
Yes, I believe some name spellings are incorrect.
Casey's name's not spelled right. There's a C in Casey's last name.
And I'm the,
Okay.
my first name is incorrect, too.
Oh, your first name's
Yes,
incorrect?
it's Barbara.
there's an
No,
A
I'm
missing.
not a Streisand.
Yes, I can see the Barbara and the Schmidt. Yes, sorry. I don't know if that was me or if that was on the original site, but I'll make sure that's corrected.
Does anyone have any issues with the one proposal sheet? And I guess I struggle with elevated being between because of the lack of paperwork that was at the actual rec meetings, especially the last one. But I think I understand a little bit about it, but is that a fair description?
For
Recreation, elevated, so an elevated isn't just a regional facility, it's between a tournament and a regional facility. And the moderate is just the local sports facility. So I certainly think the moderate was very clear. I just was trying to figure out a little bit about that, and I'm gonna suggest you leave it, and I'm gonna go back and delve into what paperwork I do have about it. But I just wanted to know if there were any committee members that had any thoughts about it.
Yeah, I think the language is a little confusing between a tournament and regional facility. It sounds like there's 2 options,
Right,
but we should go back and check, because I do think from my understanding, it's a regional facility that would be able to hold tournaments.
correct,
And that is
right,
one option versus the local option. So
yeah,
in effect, there should just be 2 options on there, but it reads like there's 3.
yeah,
Maybe the wording just needs to be changed to a regional facility with tournament capabilities.
yeah. So that would be a little bit clearer, yeah.
I agree with
And
that.
I think more accurate in terms of what they were talking about that last time. And any other, I have to say, I haven't revisited these a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
I just needed a clarification regarding the municipal brainstorming.
Right.
And where that ended. Are we, there was some confusion as to whether or not they wanted us to seek out additional possibilities.
Right. And I do have a concern about that. So,
So we need to check with the Board of Selectmen to see.
well, I think we're gonna do this next week, so I don't think we have time to do that. But instead of just saying end it at, why don't we do multiple brainstorming? Because what was presented was, you take one and, you do another. If you take that one, you have this open, but we haven't really delved into going to visit with the fire chief, to find out, number 2, are you in there was talk, Kathy, about flood zone and that type of thing, and.
They're in the slosh zone for the hurricane, Category 3, I believe.
And, but I don't know that there's anything, the whole thing about the fire is that they want to be in the South Yarmouth for calls. So there's not going to be moving to Mattacheese. So I think we need to, as a committee, and maybe with the help of the consultant, I don't know, just sort of put those things that are in the brainstorming paper that have already been indicated that the fire can't be moved to Mattacheese. So that's a no. I mean, that's, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need a new location or some help in terms of additional land. And so I think we have to work a little bit on the municipal. I don't know how everybody agrees, but it certainly was very prominent in our June 3rd meeting with the select board. So I think we can suggest that recreation, if we're going to be doing recreation over at Mattacheese, that would be a good place for the recreation committee in terms of space. So whoever ends up being the owner, private or, town, that there's space that they can have within the property, I guess, would be one thing. And that would free up a building perhaps on 28 for either
So
business.
if I would recommend, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to
That's
jump in
okay.
because I have a note going on my screen here that with the municipal, like the ended at brainstorming doesn't provide any clarity of what was discussed. So I have a note there for now
Yep.
that I think that might want to be, you might want to discuss that. What I was going to suggest is maybe we can get through the presentation and then anywhere where there's a question, maybe we can circle back.
Sure.
I just want to make sure we have enough time to get through the presentation. And then the other one was recreation. And so I think what the committee said was the phrase elevated was okay, but between a regional facility / tournament or some way to kind of group that as one, that's like kind of one option.
I think Barbara
But-
clarified that, of just call it
Okay.
regional facilities with tournament capabilities, right?
Okay. Yep.
All right, thank you, Jeff. We'll be,
Sure.
yeah, Barbara.
Because I think we may have some other ones. And so that seemed like there's a discussion piece that you guys want to have about that.
Yeah,
But I just want to see if we can get through because we have a couple other things. We want to make sure we look at the questions too tonight, which are,
right.
that's really the core of what
Yeah.
we are aiming for on Tuesday at least.
Barbara just wanted to make one comment.
I had
Sure.
a comment regarding education, just for clarification. We're going to set aside 6 to 8 acres for them, not including the ME Small School currently, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't think it was going to be
Yeah.
in all 3 scenarios, though. I think it was just going to be in one scenario, right?
And I think we'll discuss that a little bit when we get to the constraints maps. We can talk about the school situation again.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll circle back. Like tonight, I think we'll go back to this slide and just see if there's additional clarity we can get on the municipal side. Then just moving to the next slide, which is the facility condition assessment. There's a lot of information available, and we do touch on it a little bit later in the slides to kind of help the participants understand that there's a robust amount of information, but this is a really important document, so we really wanted to just highlight this initially as this would shift to Heather doing kind of this overview of existing conditions. And so, I think it's really important to identify for the participants that there's been a couple studies. So there's this study, and then as part of our project, we have a sub-consultant as well who's going to help evolve the discussions. And that's really going to come later after we have the community engagement session. The architect that we have on part of our team will help us sift through use options, and as those start to take shape, they'll put some like high level probable construction costs together to help put numbers to some of the uses. But for the time being, this slide was important.
The numbers are not going to be available that night.
No, the number we won't really have numbers available for Tuesday, and because the one number that we really have is there's 2 numbers embedded in this facility condition assessment, which is looking at trying to renovate all the buildings, and then there's some costs associated with demolition of the buildings, and then one of the things that we see coming out of the survey is if there's a question about preserving the gymnasium and looking at the gymnasium, and that's a number that we don't really have yet. But I think it's an honest I think it's an honest look at the condition of the buildings, is that, Axios finds that they're generally in poor condition. And there's a large number associated with even just resurrecting the buildings into current codes, but it excludes ADA and it excludes a final use. So we thought that just people understanding that it's a big dollar amount to get right back into those buildings and just renovate them for new use. And so I think Heather will talk through this. It'll be kind of quick, but it is baseline information that we have available in terms of the condition of the buildings at Mattacheese. And that's a existing condition. And then
Could we
the
note-
other, yes, go
Could we
ahead.
just note that that figure represents just bringing the building up to code, if I understand this correctly?
And it doesn't even take, his point was, it doesn't even take into consideration ADA.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Right, and that's that second paragraph on that graph. So the report doesn't allow for major alterations. So no extensions or additions, and costs are high level and don't include major upgrades or change in use. So the end use of the building is not yet known, which will also affect renovation costs. But we anticipate the capital expenditures over the 1 year study, excluding ADA and interiors, to be 41 million. So I think it gets more expensive as you get in there and renovate for types of uses. But it's a really important figure for people to have at least seen as we go into those facilitated discussions. And then the next two slides are about other site constraints. So through Kathy and other consultants in the previous work, there's been some good information about some of the environmental resource areas. And you can see the color coding along the top is that's tar pond. And that's a vernal pool, which has a variety of different habitat setbacks and then some building setbacks. So this will be kind of a quick talking point, this slide. But we can identify that the site is 70 acres. It's R40 zoning. The access is from Higgins Crowell Road. And then we did highlight that the existing gymnasium, we highlighted in blue, just because that's something that was pretty clear in the survey, that people were interested in talking about the gymnasium.
Right.
Tar Pond is mentioned along with the wooded swamp kind of at the bottom of the map. And then we're just identifying the police training facility sort of on the right side. And I would just say that the map is oriented so north is on the left side. So at the top is east and so forth. But this will give Heather the opportunity to kind of walk through this existing conditions constraint map. And then on the next slide, what we did was we took all the constraints and generalized them into one. And this map will be helpful as we later get into small groups. We want to put some maps down on the tables with people, and online we have a virtual option for people to kind of look at the site and imagine where things will go. And so this is where we'll talk through the talking points are this constraint map shows all the environmental constraints plus the gymnasium. It also shows the ME small school buildings and the Mattacheese buildings. And this is to the person's point who asked about ME small. This is where we would at least briefly say that the site selection process, as we understand it, is set to hopefully begin in January. And ultimately, it's kind of this question of ultimately, if Mattacheese is chosen, it adds some constraints. So the existing buildings that are on the left side that are at ME small would be occupied, and the new building would be constructed adjacent to it. And so there is this period of time, if the site is chosen, that the existing buildings would be occupied for a period of time, plus there'd be construction happening adjacent to it. So it really would consume a fair amount of the site for a period of time. Ultimately, the new school would be built, and then the buildings at ME small would become potentially available for, that area of the site would be available. And so we have an exercise that we want to do with people to kind of help map that out. But this will set the stage for people to understand that that's some of the types of constraints that we're looking at And then two more kind of map orientation type slides. So this one is the town-owned lands and trails. And so this shows a variety of land that the town owns around Mattacheese, and they're color coded and listed. A couple of the important things that we've been identifying is that the areas in blue are water supply land, and so drinking water wells are there, and it's there to be protected. So the trails that are there are informal, and they're not maintained by the town. They're not considered town trails, and so there is a constraint that we will want to talk through with the people who are here on next Tuesday. Is that it's not ideal, it's not preferred to have recreational access over the water department lands. So while they are there, it kind of wraps around Mattacheese. And then the pink is the pink area on the upper left is the golf course, obviously, and then there's Sandy Pond, and there's a cemetery listed, and there's a couple other conservation areas along the top of the map. But we did want to identify this. And then the bike path, as you all know, so Higgins Crawl has the shared use path, and then it's going to intersect with the Cape Cod Rail Trail, which is kind of just combined in red. And we think that's actually a tremendous asset for whatever the end use is on the property, is that you will be able to access the Cape Cod Rail Trail, from the site and from Higgins Crawl. So we're going to talk about that. And then kind of lastly on this one is, actually it's on the next one. If you can go to the next map, we'll talk about transportation briefly. So just kind of the zoomed out view, we're showing some roadways. So on the map page right is Route 28, which will be a major sort of access point to the property. And then on the left is the Mid-Cape Highway, and Higgins Crawl is the connector of the two. So just in terms of basic information for people, those are kind of the main access ways to the property. And so, as Heather's kind of going through these are all just existing conditions and just ways for people to become oriented with the site and the things that we're talking about. We would expect most people to not have a lot of knowledge of the property or the work to date. So this level of effort is usually worth it to get people oriented. And then the next slide is, it's a little text heavy, but this is representative of what we've encountered in Yarmouth before with the local comprehensive plan, is that you have a tremendous amount of plans and a lot of planning effort has been put forth, and it's very valuable. And so we kind of want to take this moment to highlight some of that, and especially the projects that are really sort of integral to looking at Mattacheese. So, starting with the housing production plan, we would describe that briefly. It's listed on the project website. And then recently completed under that is the Route 28 mixed use analysis. So it's a project that is just concluded that really looks at the future of the Route 28 corridor as the sewer lines become completed. And what that study really finds is that the emphasis for Route 28 is mixed use commercial activity with some residential. But that's important to note that Route 28 it's not being slated for a lot of housing development. It's really kind of lending itself to mixed use development. And then below that is the local comprehensive plan, which we want to tell people on Tuesday that we're getting ready to release a public draft sometime in August. It establishes all the future goals across a whole wide range of topics, and it provides a growth policy that encapsulates all these plans. And then, of course, the open space plan, which is a great document that talks about all the existing open space in town. And then the blocks on the right, and I had thought about maybe color coding these a little bit, and I still might want to have that little bit of leeway. But the items on the left are kind of plans, and then the items on the right are almost all project oriented. So the library is a really important project that is taking shape, and I think community members who would be coming on Tuesday should know that at least recently the committee identified the preferred location, and then really kind of pursuing the funding through the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, but noting that some of the funding for the library would be borne by the town. And then the ongoing facilities assessment, so that's looking at town hall, the senior center, both fire stations 1 and 2, and then that recreation building on Route 28. those are assessments that are underway, identifying, future capital improvements to those buildings. And then really just acknowledging Emmy Small, the school department's effort to examine the existing buildings and look at a new elementary school. And as some of you may know, MSBA provides like a percentage of funding. I don't 60% roughly. But again, the town usually funds the remainder of a project like that. And then finally, the athletic fields assessment. So the ones on the right are really put here because I think it's important for the community to know that there are several studies that are looking at pretty significant building improvements that are going to be coming up over the next 5 years that are all going to be, some level of cost to the town. And that's a way to help educate participants to know maybe where Mattacheese fits into some of those other projects. So that's kind of a lot. That takes what we have for kind of a summary of existing conditions. And then from here, we would shift to the next slide, would shift to kind of going over the community survey results.
Before you go
And I
there,
think-
I'm just going to
sure,
make a
yep.
comment that
Absolutely.
I know you mentioned it later in some area of the drive-in site. So I didn't also know whether
right.
the drive-in site project should be included in this, because what it does do is talks about events, which is also at least outdoor events, which have an impact in terms of economic development too. So I didn't know how you felt about adding something like that into the current projects.
I'm certainly okay with that. I think it's a good one because if we are talking about, the survey, as we'll see in a minute, talks a lot about recreational opportunities and other ways for people to engage in the property. And I think it is important the name has changed so many times, Parker's Landing. Kathy, if I get it right.
It's
One
Parker's
of these
River
days.
Landing.
Parker's Rivers Landing. I knew I was going to get it right one of these days. But I do think that's relevant in that it could be relevant just because it's going to open soon and it's going to be this new amenity. But it may also be informative because it's taken years of a lot of people's time and commitment and millions of grant dollars and just a real concerted effort to actually get that project to where it is today. So
I don't know if you've seen the paper that was in the capital committees, the years that it's gone on, but also the amount of money that has been used to develop that.
yeah, and
And I don't know
where
if
this
that's worth putting it in, something.
I think
in
we can
terms-
put something in. I appreciate that, Sharon. I think it's two parts. Is we put a little bit in the presentation,
Yep.
and then when we get to the facilitated questions,
Okay.
we
Yep.
have some prompts,
Yep.
and that could be where it's really useful. Is because there's a question about open space and trails and recreation, and
Right.
if the facilitators can help the people at the table know that it took 9 years and costs $4 million, like that might be really helpful information to feed
Right.
as the discussions are going on. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with adding a little bit here, and then maybe we add something in the facilitator's guide.
All right, thank you.
Okay, great. So I think from here, Liam, if you'll advance the next slide, I'm gonna switch to Oxa, and Oxa's gonna kind of go through briefly, I think the same thing is that Oxa's not necessarily presenting the same way that we would do during the meeting, but Oxa's done a lot of the survey synthesis, so I'm gonna hand it over to her for now.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to start with survey results for the demographic questions. So the survey was open from May 29th, 2025 through June 30th, and we received a total of 656 responses. And majority of the respondents either live or worked in the town for more than 5 years. And a lot of them also live close to the site. And there was a strong participation from individuals 35 to 75, which accounted for over 74% of the respondents. And amongst all age groups, there was a similar consensus with preference for indoor recreation, a community center, and outdoor recreation. And then within the groups aged 55 plus, there was also preferred use for academic and educational center. And those respondents also prioritized fixed income and senior housing if housing were to be developed on the site. Amongst households that lived close to the site within 10 minutes by car, which was 81% of the respondents, most preferred site uses were also a community center, indoor recreation, and also an academic and educational center. Next slide. This is a summary of the consensus amongst all the different answers, with majority supporting mixed-use hub with some sort of indoor and outdoor recreation and community facilities. And then there was a strong support for multi-use recreational programming, including indoor and outdoor recreation and other types of community uses such as event and performance spaces and an academic education center. The support for housing options, there was a range of options that were supported with a slight preference for low and medium density development. All categories received nearly equal levels of support, so there was broad interest, but affordability stood out as a top priority. And amongst open-ended responses, there was a similar sentiment with preference for recreation and community uses, and then also a broad interest when it came to housing options if housing were to be developed. Next slide. Now we're going to go question by question to see what the top results were. So when it came to majority of the respondents identified creating a mixed and vibrant community hub as the most important benefit of reusing the Mattacheese site. And this question was a ranking question. So when you see the 0 to 4, that's based on an average score rather than percentages that you will see in some answers. Next slide. This is also a ranking question, and majority of the respondents identified developing the site to support, again, indoor and outdoor recreation, wellness facilities, and space for arts, education, and cultural programs as a high priority. Next slide. So respondents expressed strong support for multi-use recreational programming and spaces at the Mattacheese site. The top 3 most supported uses were a community center, indoor recreation, and outdoor recreation. And these were followed by other community uses such as event and performance space and an academic education center. There was also an other category, and some of the responses that we heard from respondents included community garden, swimming pool, but also leaving the site as it is, and senior housing. And also a couple options that says library. Next slide. When asked which uses would be most appropriate if multiple uses were included at the site, the categories that received the highest level of support were multi-sports complex at a community scale, playing fields, aquatic center, and a multi-sport sport complex at a regional scale. So again, the same types of themes and consensus throughout, with preference for indoor and outdoor recreation and community uses. And for other options, for alternative ideas, people proposed library, conservation to protect natural resources, community garden, a disc golf course, and open space. Next slide. Respondents expressed strong support for the following recreational amenities. Again, similar consensus with preference for recreation opportunities, multi-sport indoor facility, but also some passive and active recreation options such as walking trails and playgrounds, and then indoor and outdoor facilities like the pool, outdoor fields, aquatic center, and then community uses such as the outdoor event space. So in order of preference, it's the multi-sport indoor facility, walking trails, community gathering space, outdoor event space, indoor pool, outdoor fields, playgrounds, and then an aquatic center. Next slide. So when asked when types of housing would be appropriate for the site if housing were to be developed, respondents expressed strong support for a range of housing options with a slight preference for low and medium density development. The most supported housing types were townhouses, followed by single family homes, and higher density options received moderate support and included apartment buildings and condos. And among the other category responses, many opposed housing, but We'll also propose alternative ideas, including mixed-use development, affordable and senior housing, 55-plus communities, multi-generational homes, as well as RV campgrounds, tiny homes, and dormitory-style housing. Next slide, please. When asked if housing should be prioritized for any specific groups, all categories received nearly equal levels of support, indicating broad interest, but affordability stood out as a top priority. So those first three categories, affordability was a theme. Next slide. A combined 75.3% of respondents supported either a full demolition or partial reuse of the existing building on site, with over 40% supporting fully demolishing the building and replacing it with new construction. And the top concerns related to development of the site were development delays and increased construction costs, followed closely by environmental impacts. But it's also important to note that a number of respondents indicated that they had no concerns. That is it. I'm going to pass that back to Jeff. Unless there's questions.
Right. Yeah. I was just going to ask. Thanks, Oxa. That was great. I mean, for tonight, for the committee, I think we definitely want to entertain any questions that you have. On Tuesday, what we would do is we would kind of end that presentation portion and we would shift kind of like right to this small group breakout session. But I guess I would be curious if the committee did have questions. I think we are happy to try to answer them now. But again, during the meeting on Tuesday, we wouldn't plan necessarily to open it up to questions on Tuesday. We would kind of shift right to that facilitated group discussion. But with that said, I don't know if the committee has any questions with that information. You should have gotten all the results, sort of the raw. There's a PDF with all the results, and that's public information. That's fine. But this is kind of the summary version, so that people can get an update on this. And then you should have gotten also the spreadsheet with all the
Comments.
the actual other answers, kind of the individualized comments and those open-ended questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Jeff on that?
Okay, so we're planning for a good turnout. We expect people to be coming out next Tuesday. My understanding from chatting with Kathy is that we're going to be in the room that you're in there. When we did the local comprehensive plan, I forget off the top of my head, I believe that we had about 50 people in person, and we had 40, I think, online.
Yes.
And it was exciting. Like I think that's a great turnout. If we get that amount, if we get less, that's fine. If we get more, that's where, especially more in person, it's going to feel energetic. It's going to feel a little chaotic, but that's a good thing for us to have happen. It means that there's a lot of people engaged and present. But when people are arriving next Tuesday, what we did last time is there was a sign-in sheet available, I think just in the hallway, and people will get a name tag. And then I think what we did last time is we just had people go, we had the tables and chairs already set up, and people can sit wherever they'd like. And for the presentation, we can kind of really, we can get more people in the room for the presentation portion. And then if there is enough people there, we have, Kathy, you can correct me with the name of the room in the back. And then there's another room, there's two other rooms, if I'm not mistaken, that would be available for additional people to do these breakout sessions.
Correct.
And then, so right after the survey results, people will be at the tables, and then we'll have several BSC staff online. And so anyone online will, Aksa, can you correct me did we manually separate people into breakout rooms last time, or did we just, can you?
Yes. So we
Yes.
have the capability of manually assigning people to breakout sessions. And we're going to do that again just to make sure that each group has a facilitator and that we have equal number of participants amongst all groups. We try to divide them as evenly as we can. And that way, if people are coming in and out of the meeting as we're presenting, we can also assign them to different rooms. Some people leave or come in as we're presenting. And then if we are having the recorded meeting, then we make sure that we include those Zooms out of the breakout session so then they can record for the public.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. And then, I think in a moment we should maybe switch to the facilitators guide that was provided and just walk through that. But Kathy, I think one of the questions, Kathy and Sharon, I think one of the questions was to just get a better understanding of how many committee members you would expect to be available next Tuesday, and if we could now just have a brief discussion of whether anyone from the MUC committee is interested or available to be online, and then who would be in person. Because what we'd like to try to do is have at least a BSC staff person at every table and a staff person from BSC in the virtual breakout rooms. If we get a lot of people in person, we might think like maybe Kathy or someone else from the town could also take a table and facilitate the groups. But so maybe we could have a brief discussion of that. I don't have a strong sense of who's available to come next Tuesday.
Well, John Anderson, who's not here tonight for the same reason, he's also on the Finance Committee, and he would not be able to come on the 15th. I think everybody else is able.
I will not be in attendance. I'm off Cape.
Okay,
I'm also, a family event came up, plus I have a work event. I'm not going to be able to be here.
okay. There are 3 out of the 7 of us that are not going to be here.
So there'll be four MUC committee members available.
Casey, myself, Barbara, and Joe.
Okay, and then would we want to have any of them be participating online or have
I
them
don't
all in
think I
person?
should
I don't
be
know if
the
there's a
one
preference.
online. I don't know.
I'll
if
be home by
Casey
then.
or- Huh?
I'll be back in Yarmouth by then.
Well, that's good, Joe.
So I can be there in-house, no problem.
You can be at.
Are you looking for people to like run the small meeting from Muck, or you have staff people going to do that?
Generally speaking, we will have a staff person to facilitate the groups. But whenever possible, we find that kind of having a committee member in each of the groups is valuable. But it sounds like maybe no one from the MUC committee will go online. But I think that's okay. Asa, do you agree? Like, I think we can still facilitate those groups.
If you want, if the 4 people attending want to be in person, we'll have 4 BSC attendees in person as well. So each group can have a BSC attendee, and the group that's online, we can manage that without the committee members,
Okay.
if that's the preference.
If it is optimal to have a committee member online, I'm happy to do it.
I think it's helpful so that you can see what the process was like for the people. And then I also think we need note takers, because at some point we're going to need to be reporting out, and typically committee members are the kind of the note takers. Sometimes you'll get a volunteer from a very energetic person in your group, but I think we have to kind of rely on the committee and staff and to do that, because BSC group's really going to be facilitating and asking the questions and not necessarily able to take all the notes, so.
Do you know, Kathy, if there's anyone that's willing to come from any of the committees themselves?
That's an interesting question, and that would obviously be ideal. I did send out a notification, that flyer, to all the boards and committees, asking the staffers to forward that along. And I know that they have, or a lot of them have, but I haven't heard back directly from anyone on a board or a committee.
Okay.
So maybe if Casey's willing to be remote, that would be helpful.
And if you're stuck for, note taker or whatever, I'm sure the committee members would be happy to help. So,
And depending upon how many people actually show up, I can be either or, in person or work online.
I did ask in the information that I sent out if people could get back to the MUC project email address, whether they're going to be in person or remote, and I got like 13 people, and it's kind of 50-50 right now. Kind of close to the LCP, it was kind of almost 50-50 as well.
so is there any recording of the discussions, the breakout discussions?
Liam is going to be here, and he's going to be recording it. The breakout sessions themselves, I believe, can be recorded, but the way it's going to be set up here is there'll be tables. The way we set it up before was 3 tables of 2. this way, that way, and then this way, and along with a bunch of different chairs and around the room, so that for the presentation, there was enough places for people to sit, but then there was also the 3 breakout rooms, so to speak, in here, and then we went into room B with the 4th one, because we had so many people. Like I mentioned, we also have room A for some reason, if that ends up needing to be used.
So if somebody were in A or in B, would they be able to record what's going on?
No.
Okay.
You're not going to be able to record here, too. It's just
It's-
big, one
yeah,
loud
well,
noise.
Right.
What we ended up doing for the presentation, we recorded the video, and then we also included, and we can do it here, in the presentation, incorporated the facilitated questions that people were asked, and just kind of said they went out into their breakout rooms, and then when everyone came back for their reporting out, we recorded that, and that got in part of the presentation that was available for people to take a look at. Because when everyone's talking, you're not going to hear any of that, so.
Right. And the, maybe I should wait till the whole presentation. So, I had one question about the extra comments that one can make as a facilitator to extend conversation if it.
I think maybe Jeff can
Jeff
go
was
through,
gonna-
yeah.
Yeah, we should touch on that very soon. That's the prompts, as we would call them. So, yeah, I mean, I'll be really candid. I mean, it's a bit of an art to have these unfold, and a little bit of flexibility is necessary from all of us just to see, because we don't know, no one really knows how many people are going to show up either in person or online. So there's always a little bit of just adaptation that's happening kind of right before. But the general outline works really well, and we found that people have positive responses to it, both online and in person. So we're pretty excited about it, and we're comfortable. And then, so there'll be the facilitated discussion of questions, and we have that approximately slated to go for 40 minutes. And so we I'll get to we have that facilitators guide. We have 4 general topics, and we're kind of estimating 10 minutes per topic to get through that. And then what we're going to do while people are physically in the room, they're going to be, it's usually good because people are engaged in conversation, and then we're going to call the time limit on that. And then we're going to shift kind of directly into a map exercise. So in person, we'll have, 1 or more maps rolled out on the table, and it's that constraints map that we showed earlier, with the orange hash marks. So in person, each of the facilitators will have tracing paper, and we'll have some pre-cut out bubbles, let's call them bubble diagrams. And then we'll have this discussion, because people will be educated from the presentation, they'll be informed from the discussions, and then we're going to have them look at a map, and it's a really good flow for people to then, at least at a high level, start to put shapes, ideas as to where things can actually fit on the property, and where would they prefer to put them. And we'll go through that process for about 20 minutes, which will be fun. I think it's going to be really fun for people, and there will be an online component in person. And then once that's done, we'll call time, and that's when we'll have a volunteer to kind of report out and summarize what the group talked about in terms of the questions. And then it should be pretty brief about the maps. Our group found that we really like this location here. And then at the end of the meeting, we have all this information to kind of pull together, and that's when we would leave, and that's where our process to synthesize all that information, look at what we gathered, and then eventually we'll come back with 3 concept plans that are based on all this input. And I don't have another opportunity to say this during our presentation, but when we're talking to people and the facilitated questions, we're not really looking to test people on what's right or wrong, or no, that's never going to work. We're not doing that. We want to gather all that information from people, and we accept the ideas. And then when we come back to Muck with the conceptual design plans, where we've actually put dimensions to things, that's when we would have the ability to talk through, we heard this, but the actuality of it, the practical implication of it is this, and so therefore it won't really work out, or we'll have explanation as to why certain things made sense and certain things didn't. But we're usually pretty sensitive to not battle back with people that, you know, to say that they're wrong or it's not going to work. We want to like get the input, and the mapping exercise will help people realize that even though the property is 70 acres, when you look at some of the constraints, it's actually not, it's not going to fit everything that everyone wants, and the mapping exercise will be really valuable for that. Great. So I think if it's possible, Liam, we sent a separate PDF, which is more like a Word doc, and I don't know if that's something that you can share with the committee. That one is the schedule. There's one more document that,
No, not that one.
yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for doing that. So again, we kind of went over all of this already. We have a couple objectives. On this one, we have the timelines, so you can see where we're trying to keep this consolidated, and it's a little long of a meeting, but we think with the facilitated discussions on the map, I think people will stay engaged. Arrival, we talked about that. We plan to really start at about 6:05. And then the presentation, Sharon, this is where we had kind of slated to hopefully have you do those first 3 slides, those introduction of the muck process, review existing conditions, review the survey results, and then we'll break out. And then on the next page, a lot of this I already mentioned, so we'll shift into the breakout groups. And I think it's important to mention that each group will have the same questions. So I think that's key for us to gather this consistent type of information. So each group in the room will have the same questions, and then everyone online will be kind of talking about the same things. And the beauty of it is we ask the question and then the discussion happens. And so that's really where we take notes and get ideas. Trace paper, in person. Oh, so the scenario planning exercise, that's what I want to talk about. And I think it's a little bit rudimentary in person. We'll have trace paper and some cutouts. And then online, what we're going to do is be a little more creative. So Zoom as a platform has what's called a whiteboard. And we think that our facilitated groups online can do a pretty close to the idea of trace paper and placing these bubble diagrams. And so maybe if I can, I would turn to Aksa to give a quick overview of what the online version will look like. And so Liam, this would require Aksa to be able to share a screen. And I'm thinking, talking to Kathy, I know the committee can't necessarily see this very well, but we wanted to kind of give it a dry run tonight to just show what it would look like. So I think I'll hand it over to Aksa. And Aksa, you're muted if you're talking. I just want to say that.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Jeff. So like Jeff explained, we're going to have a map of the site with the constraints showed. So this is the constraints lines map that, oh, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the orange areas are the ones that have constraints lands, and we also have the auditorium hatched here because we're not proposing anything to be built on there. So like Jeff explained, we're going to have an in-person map and an online map. The in-person map is going to use a cutout of the same images that you see in the legend here on the left, and you will have trace paper and markers to basically create bubble diagrams, diagrammatic areas of where you want to see proposed uses and amenities. And it's supposed to be very conceptual. So we're not worrying too much about scale or which areas you cannot be developing in, even though we have some scaled cutouts here and some areas that show constraints. But the idea is to get creative with the ideas, and then we're going to be the ones that make sure that that translates into concepts that work with the constraints that we have in the right scale. So we will share our screen like I'm doing so right now, and essentially the facilitator is going to be drawing on the board while you're facilitating the discussion. We will be using some of the elements that are here in the legend. These are to scale, so this includes an 8-acre site for the potential ME small school. We will start by letting everyone in the group know that we will not be placing this directly where the existing school area is, that if it were to be developed, it would be somewhere else on the site while this use still exists. And we will also let them know that this option is not going to be in every concept that's going to be developed, but they have this option to include in their diagramming exercise. So we have a few other cutouts. We have a rec building, a parking count that's very similar to the parking lot here. We have a soccer field. We also have a square that shows 6 acres with 38 units of duplex housing. So these are just some scaled cutouts, but the idea is going to be to start drawing on the map itself, which is locked in place. And we have an option here to use Smart Drawing, which is a cool tool that lets you draw features and basic shapes, but then they become polygons. So roughly, I'm going to show an example. If we want to propose, let's say, a playground here in this area, and I can draw a circle, and it turns into a nice circle. Or if we want to say, I want this area to be reserved for, or I don't want anything to happen to trees here, I could draw a circle right here. It just turns into a circle, or it turns into a rectangle. So we will be placing basically diagrams, lines, polygons, and we could either color code them. So the facilitators have the option to color code these and add them to the legend to say what they represent, or they can add text directly into the polygons of what they want to see in their area. So it's a fun exercise to really create concepts of where people would want to see different amenities and uses. And the way it's going to work online, because there are going to be 4 different breakout groups, we'll have a page assigned to each person. So right now it says facilitator Oxa. We're going to have 4 total facilitators online. So they'll each get 2 of these maps. So once they're done with diagramming on both of those maps, they will then export it as a PDF. So we have those concepts to take it to the next level and create something that's more than a bubble diagram. And that example, I believe, is in one of the PowerPoints that when Jeff gets back to his screen, maybe he can show that example. We have bubble diagrams that then translate into actual concepts. And other than that, I think that's those are the only components of the whiteboarding exercise. The in-person one is going to be very similar, except the map is going to be a paper map. And we're going to be using trace paper over the maps to draw with markers. And then we'll also have scaled cutout images on cardstock that people can place on top of the trace paper. And then take photos of it. And those images we'll look at themes across all of these bubble diagrams and then use those to come up with common themes that will then translate into more concepts. Let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be an assumption that is as simple and straightforward as you made this seem like this will be complicated and for folks online. And we really don't want people getting frustrated because it's not working or it's not doing what they want it to do. And we're kind of spending just 10 minutes trying to just figure out how things work. And we're not really getting to any of the objectives of the exercise. So
I think the facilitators will
Is
be driving.
is the concern that they'll be frustrated with the technology? Because the idea is that the facilitators would be the ones that are doing the annotations and moving around the objects and facilitating the discussion at the same time.
okay.
So they won't be the ones that have to learn how to use the tool. They'll just be guiding us to create the diagrams.
Okay.
Can you click and drag again the blue
Yeah.
box like you just did? That's what I was picturing. I see that you
Absolutely.
drew the circles. That is something I'm familiar with also, but the click and drag is so much easier, especially if one of the panelists says, no, that's not what I mean, go to the left. It helps the facilitator
Exactly.
to understand where they're going on the diagram. And yeah, just like you're doing, that's perfect.
Yes, and we have the capabilities to, rotate these, but as facilitators, we would be the ones that are moving around these items in the legend and drawing on the board, but then also at the same time facilitating the discussion of where people would want us to move things. And there are other elements in here that we can use, such as sticky notes. So if I want to make a comment about a specific area, like I am able to do that via sticky note or other types of tools. So there are a lot of options in here for the facilitators to engage with, but we do not expect people who are joining online to learn this tool or be able to know how to use that tool. They're there to just help us facilitate the discussion and their vision.
Great.
Can I just get a clarification of your process? If I understand everything that you're saying correctly, if I happen to be an online facilitator, my job will be to ask the questions, promote the conversation, et cetera, and if part of that conversation says, okay, we'd like to put a field here in this location, as a facilitator, I would have access to the tools to do that, or would someone from BCS actually be doing that physical movement with putting the field on the map?
Yes, we will be the ones at BSC doing the physical movement of these objects on the map, but we will be asking the group where they want to see and building on that conversation on where, if there's consensus of where people would want to see those options. But if there's no consensus and that people want to see in multiple places, we can copy this, put it in a couple places, add notes that there was divided opinions on where people would want to see soccer fields. So we would, at BSC, would be the ones that are moving the actual elements here and drawing the illustrations, but we would be also the ones that are facilitating the discussions on where people want to see those things on the map.
I think the
Okay, so-
confusion was some of the committee members maybe needed to facilitate the online, and that's where, when it was discussed earlier.
I think so. I guess what I'm driving at is if I am the facilitator for an online session,
No.
will I have access to those tools, or will there be an additional BCS person behind the scenes, you know, using these tools? That's what I'm trying to clarify.
BSC will be doing the facilitating and the moving of things around. You're just kind of participating, hearing what people have to say. Maybe you will provide a little clarification when people are asking a question and you know the answer to it, and participating in it that way. But
Someone behind the
facilitating
scenes, okay.
and all of that is being done by BSC personnel.
And that's fine, because if not, then I would have liked to have had an opportunity to play
You need
with the
training.
play with the software for 10 minutes or so beforehand.
No,
that
that
works.
would be a big ask.
Yeah, that works
Yeah,
too.
all the BSC, there's going to be a BSC person in each breakout session that's going to be doing the actual moving around the objects and design and drawing on the maps. But if anyone from the committee wants to be online, they can help facilitate just the conversations, point out where something might not make sense, or if they have any other ideas, or if they want to be note takers or do report outs, that's their role.
The one thing I would like to point out is things like fields, and Steve can probably say this, need to be oriented a certain way, so that
Yes.
people aren't, so I think some things like that, the facilitators will say, well, it wouldn't be that orientation, it'd probably be north-south issues, so that people aren't staring into the sun. And I'm sure like the same thing with the softball is going more towards the north, so that people aren't there's certain orientations that need to happen with regard to sports.
Correct. And we have the capability of doing that, so we can rotate these however people wish.
I'm
I
saying
just had two
ones.
quick comments too. Is I think, not everyone engages with maps, every day. So we do want to be cognizant of that. I think part of the preface will be that this is not intended to be an exact science to put things on the map. I think it's really intended to help people understand that the site, although 70 acres, is actually not going to be that big when you start to place certain things. And so we do want to let people know that this is going to result in bubble diagrams that help identify the approximate area where people thought it might work good. Aksa and I went back and forth on whether to just do bubbles and have no shapes or anything, but then we really started to kind of talk about the ME Small property and how the school department's already kind of pegged the potential need for 8 acres, and so we see that as something that we need to address. And I think, as Aksa said, there's probably going to be at least two, if not 3 maps that we try to come up with for each group. And as Aksa was introducing this, I did start to think that we could potentially get people warmed up a little bit if we potentially started with talking about the school briefly and just saying that let's start the first map, we're going to put the school in play. Because once you put that 8 acre block in the mix, it actually really limits what can go around it. And maybe that's a good icebreaker for people to start with that, and then just say, okay, then the next map is going to be one where we don't have that constraint to work with. And maybe that's one way to kind of break the ice for people to kind of get
Right.
used to moving blocks around and talking about this, even in person. That could be a good way to start the conversation. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is we were talking about the housing. The housing can take so many different variations. So we at least wanted to put something on the table that we think would be like moderate. Um, you know, we hear on the survey that there are some concerns or questions about denser multifamily housing. And on the other side of that is there's people who say, single family only. So this block for housing is kind of something that we looked around Yarmouth and found a couple areas that have this kind of moderate density. And so this is actually like I wanted to discuss this with the group if it's okay, but the King Circuit, so up where is this?
Kingsway?
Kingsway, yeah. So Kingsway, yes. So understanding that the ownership pattern is probably not what the community is looking at, but there's a couple of these sort of subdivisions, this area that has duplexes and triplexes, which we feel like is moderate density. And so we took a block and just tried to get a density calculation, and we figured out that on one of them it's approximately 6 acres, results about that number of units. And we thought, at least for discussion purposes, it could be good for people to have some sense of what we're talking about with housing. We didn't want to just show an empty block of housing and have no one have any idea of what we're talking about. So we kind of modeled it after one of those neighborhoods, and I just wanted to get a sense from the committee. I think, in my professional opinion, it's a good way to talk about housing without getting too detailed. But we did want to have some reference points so that people could understand what kind of housing might fit in 6 acres. And this is it's like duplexes and triplexes. But if you drive through or look at some of those neighborhoods up there, it's really well planned out. There's a lot of trees, and it seems like a pretty pleasant area. So I wanted to have that quick discussion with the committee about putting this housing block on there.
Well, Jeff, I actually have another question, sort of along the same lines. First of all, when you talk about 2 or 3 different maps, will they be the same footprint? And if they're not the same footprint, will there be one map, for example, that shows nothing on the site other than, land that can't be used because it's a conservation? For example, would there be a map without the solar field being visible on the map, and just a plain straight piece of land availability where people can place things, or will your maps represent the actual space as it exists? Because that can be confusing for people to see, well, there's something already there, how can I put anything there? Kind of a sort of thing. And can we see those maps in advance, if in the event that you do have different map scenarios? And last but not least, just in my observation of these maps that you're displaying on the screen right now, they're very difficult to see and identify particular spots themselves visually. So there has to be some flexibility to make things larger, especially if our audience is a little bit older.
Sure. Yeah. So a couple things. I mean, I think that in prepping for your meeting tonight, Kathy warned us that when the screen share is on that TV, it's really small. When you're on Zoom, so if you're just online participating, that screen will be bigger and it'll be more visible. So I'm not concerned with the visibility. I think in your room right now that TV is far away and it's kind of small, but for a Zoom participant, you're on your computer, it should be visible. The other question is that the map that you see here with the orange constraints, this is the map that we're going to use. And then I think the one other variable that we haven't talked about yet is the gymnasium that's highlighted in blue. I think that there is an opportunity for people to envision, as you kind of said, like a clean slate, nothing. except those orange boundaries. So the orange boundaries are the environmental buffers that we don't want to be placing anything in. But I do think one of the exercises would be just don't worry, like pretend nothing's here right now, except for those orange hash marks. And so you'll have to just kind of look past those existing structures, and the facilitator will help guide people. So there will be one map where there's only environmental constraints, and then there's at least that second map where we have to acknowledge ME small being that potential reuse. And then there's this oddball, this one that we didn't really discuss yet, which is that there is some consensus in the survey that shows that people would like to talk about preserving the gymnasium. And so the blue hash on that map would be if the gym stays, the exercise is that if the gym stays, everything kind of has to work around that. You have to kind of make that fit. The solar field, from what we're told, is that by the time there's a development concept proposal, the solar could be decommissioned. So the solar is not the same kind of constraint as the ME Small School, for example, or the gymnasium, which are these constraints that we want people to think about. So hopefully that answered your question. I was trying really hard to actually answer the question.
I can just add to it, Barbara. I think one thing that's helpful to remember is that the BSC facilitator, if there's going to be 4, and if we have 40 people online, just whatever the other LPC, that's 10 people in a room, like on the computer with the facilitator, so it's not an overly intimidating space to be like, if I have a question and I'm trying to envision what, you know what I mean? I think
Right.
the facilitator will be guiding it, and it won't be too many people trying to raise their hand and ask a question to, and then the BSC people will be showing the different maps and different options.
I have a question too, Jeff, in terms of your legend and your shapes. Are they fixed shapes, or can they be
Yeah.
reconfigured as you're talking to people?
Yeah, that was my question, yeah.
That's a fantastic question. Do you want to take a shot at that, Aksa?
We can configure them to any shape that you would like. So the reason we chose some of these in the shapes that they are because those are just generally the kind of shapes that these types of uses have, like soccer field, rec building, parking. But we can create any shapes. We have, circles and triangles and rectangles and diamonds and
So may I give you an example? And for
hexagon,
you
yeah.
to do it? If I were in your group and I wanted, and of course, the school talked about 6 to 8 acres, not necessarily 8. I know you're taking the larger number. And I wanted it in the center of Higgins Kroll Road, abutting Higgins Kroll Road, in other words, and to the left of the sensitive yellow area, right there. And so if I were to shave that in any other configuration so that, the corner wasn't over towards the ME Small School but scooted that way, you could do it. Or, I don't know what kind of shape that would be, but and
I think it's possible. I think that's where the facilitator will come in.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that question, Sharon. I think there's some room for this to happen both in person on the trace paper and online. There will be some discussion though. I think because I had this idea too about the wetland in the front,
Right.
the orange circle, right? So that's a wooded marsh.
right.
I think we're gonna get someone who's gonna be like, well, I want the school to wrap around it, like a kind of like a rainbow.
Right.
And I think that's where the facilitator will have to talk to the people a little bit and say, okay, that makes sense superficially, but realistically, the school is unlikely to kind of create this big bending arc. So that's where we kind of ended up with these boxes, at least to start.
Yep.
But I do think, like for housing, for example, there could be opportunity to kind of morph the housing shape a little bit. But at least we wanted to start with the easiest and then see where the discussion goes. And collectively, that's our big task as a result of whatever we can gather from the community next week. Is then we're really going to kind of go into like the conceptual design phase, where that's where even where Oxa drew Emmy small with kind of a blob or like a blob shape, that's where we can really work with that. We can kind of plot what might actually be feasible for development and kind of massage them to shapes that might be a little more friendly than just squares.
Have you?
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, have you measured the size of the present Emmy small?
No, not as a campus, kind of like that conglomerate of spaces. We have not.
Yeah.
We kind of took on face value the school department's request, and we could potentially show 6 acres, but we just went with 8 just because it encompasses their range of 6 to 8.
Right.
But yeah,
So
no,
this
we didn't measure Emmy small as it lays out today.
Okay.
So this example that I just this housing example is 6 acres. So I just copied it and I labeled it as ME school, and I just changed the color here. And then if we want specific shapes if people have preference for how they want the buildings shaped, we can also use sticky notes and add those types of comments on the side too. Yeah. But the diagramming exercise, it's not really focusing on what kind of shapes buildings need to be. It's more diagrammatic of where people want to see different types of uses, and then we'll translate that into a more of a concept for how things best fit with the parameters we have and the constraints that we have. So we're not putting that pressure on the actual attendees to gauge like how things are going to fit or where things cannot or can go. It's an exercise that's supposed to be easy and very conceptual for them, and then we are the ones that will make sure that it actually translates into an actual concept that can be implemented.
And will your map also show the road Chickadee, because that road is actually part of the 70 acres? Chickadee.
So you mean the Chickadee Lane on the left side of the map there?
Correct,
So you're saying that that's part of the 70 acres?
correct.
Okay.
We can double check that. The boundary that we used was based off of assessor's parcel data. So we used the assessor's parcels as the boundary of the site.
Right.
But we can go back and include the road if that's included in the parcel.
I think that would be interesting based on one of the suggestions in the survey, one of the suggestions in the printed part of person's presentation on their survey, which included single-family homes on Chickadee. On the other side of Chickadee being on the side of Mattacheese.
Yep.
I haven't.
Yeah, because I can
that
imagine
idea.
I can imagine the group drawing a long linear rectangle down to match the single family houses on the left side of Chickadee, and then on the right side. Yeah, I think that's all stuff that we can map and kind of include in the exercise. I think and again, I'm being candid with the group. We added this map exercise. We were originally going to stick with just the facilitated questions.
Yep.
But I think looking at the site and knowing some of the constraints, this is a really great opportunity for people to try to engage in a map of the site and help understand that there are constraints and that not everything's going to fit. It's not going to be perfect. So we will likely have some discussions with people, and I feel like professionally we might end up with more questions than answers by trying to assess what everyone kind of came up with ideas. But in a real genuine way, I think it's going to be great for people to put a shape on this parcel and say, it gets them to think about, we know that they're not site designers, they're not planners, but it'll get them to think about how things will actually potentially fit on the site. And so we didn't want to miss the opportunity to have people put trace paper down and to kind of engage online, just to be part of the process to look at what's going to fit. So I guess my point was that it's not going to be perfect. We won't have every little inch of the map covered. I think we'll have spaces that just won't get filled, and that's where, when we get into our landscape architect kind of phase, we'll be able to fill in some of those gaps and make sense of all that stuff.
Jeff, do we have the examples from Marston Mills that did we include those at the PowerPoint to show how the diagram turns into a concept? I don't know if you got to that yet.
Yeah, so we we'll rely on Liam. If Liam can switch back to the first set of slides that we were looking at, the last slide of the PowerPoint, we show the bubble diagram. And so, Oxa, I think if you stop sharing your screen,
Yes.
we have the bubble diagram, which is we go from the community meeting Tuesday, we go to bubble diagrams, and then we have an actual conceptual design plan, and they're all a little different. So yeah, Liam, if you go to the end, the last slide, I know it may be hard for people to see, but it gives an example
Nope.
of you're doing great. It's getting close. I can tell.
We have it up here on our slides
Okay.
screen.
So the diagram that we're going to see on screen is basically, this is the diagram on the right. This is what the exercise will come out of. We'll come out of with organic shapes on roughly where people want to see different recreation uses, with some scaled images as well that we have in the legend. And that diagram, those diagrams are then going to be used to come up with themes of where people want to see certain uses or amenities, and then translate it into a concept. I don't know if the next slide has the concept.
It doesn't. It does not.
I can pull that up really quick too.
Yeah, if you want to pull that up, I appreciate that. I did not include that, but it's what we would call an iterative process where we have a lot of the team's efforts, which was very informative, and we will be incorporating that, as we move into the concepts. But then we have the community survey. We'll have the facilitated questions, and then we'll have these real rough drawings that will convert to bubble diagrams. And I think the expectation would be that we bring back the bubble diagrams to Muck, and we could probably turn those around pretty quickly and just talk about them. And then we turn them into, conceptual designs where we actually show roadways, and, plot out buildings that have dimensions. And that will be the kind of that third phase. I'm not sure if Heather's talked about that with the committee, but that's my understanding is we come forward later with, 3 conceptual design plans. And Oxa, we have another project that's a good example. So Oxa can hopefully share that in a moment just to show you what the difference is, and kind of the end product is that conceptual design plan.
There's Joe.
Joe is on Lake Champlain, by the way.
He looks
Lake
relaxed.
Champlain.
Oh,
It is where I am.
wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's where I was a little while ago.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you could break yourself away.
I'm on
Oxy,
a
are you-
cabin here.
Will you be able to? Are you okay? Here she goes. Great, perfect. So Oxa's
Sorry
gonna
about
share
that.
this.
So
That's okay.
here's one that was translated. So the diagram,
Oh.
there's an example of a diagram and how it gets translated into more of a concept. So this is the concept that was created out of a exercise that we did that had scale cutout images, in-person facilitation. We had multiple groups specify where they wanted to see different amenities. We then distilled those themes and created up with a concept. This one was a recreation concept, but we also had other options. This is a site in, it's a Marston Mills Elementary School in Barnstable. And we came up with concepts, a recreation concept, a recreation and housing concept, and another one that had a mix of uses. But it basically takes the themes that come out of the diagrams and then translates them into more of a concept based, and then we are the ones that make sure that all the constraints are accounted for, that the scale fits, that the knowledge that we have about the sites are incorporated, but we don't rely so much on the actual facility discussion and residents to know about the site as much as we do.
Well,
Great. So I mean that's our that's our approach for Tuesday. And I don't know if the committee has more questions. I know that we wanted to circle back to maybe even the first couple slides to figure out if there are some tweaks that you guys want to make or if there's questions.
Well, I think we're happy with the recreation being changed from regional facility with tournament capabilities.
Okay. Yep, and then I think Ox is sharing her screen again, so I think this is the concept B1. I don't know what this
It
one
has
is.
housing and recreation, so it's just another. The first one was more just recreation options. So just to show that different themes, some people might prefer housing with recreation, or some would prefer just recreation. So we came up with different concepts through those themes and the scaled imaged bubble diagramming exercises.
Great, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think
Looks
if
good.
you, yeah, perfect. All right, so then, yeah, do we, back to that one, it seemed like we had one question about how to address the recreation. No, it was the educational component.
Municipal.
Municipal, thank you.
So maybe not saying ended at, but just saying brainstorming with multiple moves, or, I mean, I'm not quite sure where we're finally at, but, I mean, some of the information that Bill and Roby had gotten, is preventing some of the moves from moving forward.
Right.
Right, so you can't move the fire station. It doesn't mean you can't improve the building and look at other options to do so, but,
I think if you look at the survey too, I think looking at it as a municipal campus wasn't exactly super high on the actual results for that.
Right.
Like,
and the library has already selected
Yeah.
their preference. It does not include Mattacheese. There's this natural resources is still an issue, and all of the other, I guess, I think they're also talking about the Yarmouthport Firehouse, was one of the ones that was number 2, I think. But that may be, I'm not quite sure how to handle municipal, because they certainly are asking for more definitive information. So, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one option might be, and this is just my suggestion is because I was really my approach to creating the slides to begin with was to keep your kind of June 3rd presentation intact. And there would be one option to just leave it as ended at brainstorming. And Sharon, if you're in charge of kind of speaking through that, you could just say that, the discussions about the municipal, services are still ongoing, or,
Right.
Continuing to occur. And that's kind of why they ended at brainstorming.
Right.
It's because they really just didn't take that next step to go for refinement. So maybe there's an opportunity to just speak to that briefly. Or we could change the text, either one.
I think Bill Scott in that meeting did talk about all of the things, like the library's already made the decision, the fire can't go there because they need to have their response times. I think he did summarize that into a memo to Bob Rittenauer, which I can send to the committee so you can see what his response was to that.
Yeah. But that would be helpful, and then the question is, do we say ended at brainstorming, or just say municipal brainstorming? With working with the selectmen, or, something like that. I don't know.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to Jeff's point, is
Yep.
that might be a very relevant thing when we're presenting finally to the Board of Selectmen, or
Right.
the Select Board rather, but for the purposes of tonight's agenda and the Tuesday
Sure.
activities, we can address it and then finalize.
What we're doing,
Sure.
yeah. So I guess we can live with it.
Well, I think I'll send the memo around.
Yep.
I really think it was really the only thing that kind of got left is if town hall left here and fire station was to move over here with a new facility built for the engines and that type of thing, that might be one option. Obviously, if there's recreation that's happening over there, it makes sense for the recreation department to move over there because they're going to be right there with the facilities. And then I know that the discussion was if the fire came here, then DNR could maybe go over there.
Over there.
Those are kind of really hard for you guys
Right.
to do the investigations and
Right.
come up with recommendations on that. I think something for the select board is talking about the survey, where people are really looking at as not being what they wanted to see over at Mattacheese. So I think that's more information. They didn't really, they kind of wanted more information. Maybe that's more information along with Bill's memo. And I don't know whether maybe there's some question that could be asked, a facilitated question that could be asked related to that. We ask about whether you're willing to increase, your property taxes to do X, Y, or Z. Maybe we can ask some type of question about that. Because obviously moving all these things around is probably going to be relatively more expensive than maybe doing some of the repairs to some of the buildings that we have
Right.
now.
And we are looking at the goal of what the committees want and also what the public wants. So hopefully there's a combination that works. And I would love to know what the present use of ME Small is in terms of acreage. I would love to know that. If they're set back, so, I'd like to know what the parking and the building are, so to speak. Because if you move the
Yeah.
property to the road, Higgins Kroll, you're taking away around the long driveway. You do need bus availability.
Correct, and then you also
but-
probably need some type of playground, some type of field for the kids to do
Right.
gym. So I'm sure that all of that was taken into consideration when they made the recommendation, school committee did,
Right.
of the 6 to 8
But I'd
acres.
be curious as to what it is right now.
You'd have to include there's some field area as
Yeah.
well.
Right. Anyway,
Are we gonna get an answer to that? The actual
eventually. I
current-
don't know whether
current
we'll have it
acreage?
by next week or not, but
I don't think it's very difficult for them to do a
We-
quick
I don't think we need it.
area of just what is the parking and the school itself, but that
Yeah.
won't tell you
How
necessarily
many
everything.
acres,
Yep.
acres is currently,
Yeah, I think Axa can do that pretty easily with her
okay, not that we need it for the,
magic
Workshop.
mapping machine.
right.
Yes, we can. So Google Earth is, we can use Google Earth too. It's very easy to just map out an area and it'll tell you the total acreage. So I can get you the information really fast.
Thank you.
okay, thanks.
Do you want to do the questions, Jeff?
Yes, I think we should, if we can. That would be fantastic, because I think that's how we would wrap up.
Right.
So I would ask if Liam, I'm sorry to make you do all this, but going back to the facilitator's guide, which you had up earlier, and then we kind of shifted around. As he pulls them up, our approach to the facilitated questions is that we would provide a printout for participants. So most of the information, once we kind of go through this, we would have most of the information available for people when they walk in, so they have a little handout. Except the way we set it up, at least for kind of talking about it, is that we have this facilitator's note at the bottom, and we kind of grade it out. So for the participants, we would take out the prompts, but we feel that a participant walking in has this sheet of paper, and through the course of the presentation, they can look at questions, and we find that that's useful for people to have a kind of a preview of what's coming. The questions are really to get the conversation going.
Right.
And so the way we try to do it, and it's like an art form, it's not a science, is that the facilitator will greet everybody in the group and say, hey, we just got all that information in the presentation, we have this question for you, and we kind of just read the question to them. And then people usually start engaging pretty quickly, and with the sheet of paper in front of them, you don't need to read every single word, but as we go through to facilitate, we would throw out, some of these key issues to consider as much as we can, or we usually see how the conversation's going, but we try to highlight these key issues. And then after the conversation has flowed a little bit, we say, okay, we have a second question. We're talking about the community center. So what types of space or activities would you want to see? And usually that's a pretty quick kind of, people will have some ideas for that, and we'll document those. And then we want to identify that, for example, through the LCP process or the budget planning process, there's several other projects, being discussed, large ones. And we would just say, the library, ME Small, the other facilities, and the community center, which we already touched on in the presentation. So these people have had a little bit of information available to them this evening. And we asked them, how would you rank them if understanding that the town can't do them all at once?
Right.
How would you prioritize these? And it really is meaningful for the people to kind of think through that a little bit. And we always get people who say all of them at once. That's the only way. But we have some people who will be like, well, we can't do them all at once. We can't. Like there are some taxes are involved in that, and we won't want to have all of the taxes occur. The tax payments occur at the same time. So this is the nature of the questions that we have set up. And so this first one is really gymnasium and community center oriented. And then if you'll go to the next topic.
Now, can I stop you while you're doing this, or would you
Absolutely,
prefer?
yes. Yep.
So,
Yep.
The prompts, one of my questions was prompts. Is every facilitator going to go through every prompt that's listed here? Or do they gauge their own community and decide whether they should or shouldn't
Yeah, generally speaking, we would
encourage?
encourage the facilitator to try, but if they're not necessary or they don't come up, they might not come up. So it's a good question, Sharon. So I think if some of them are super important, we might want to talk right now about whether we elevate it to make sure that it's like an actual question.
Right.
So I don't know if there was something specific that you're seeing there that you wanted to discuss.
In terms of the question 3, I appreciate being asked, and it's not alphabetical, but is there any prompt that asks about, are any of them revenue drivers? Or, in terms of placing an importance on what goes first, is there?
None of them are revenue drivers, they're town buildings.
Yeah, I think yes, I agree with Kathy. I think the way the first topic is the gymnasium and community center are community facilities that we would not presume that they would be generating revenue. So if that should be clearer somehow, I think we can make that clear in perhaps the questions or this very first introductory statement. Try to get it. If you look at the top, it's just under the heading Gymnasium and Community Center. So the survey results show support for retaining the gymnasium and auditorium, as well as support for constructing a new community center. These would require significant town funds to construct and future funds for operations and staff. So I think we were trying to preface this topic on that they are going to be community driven and not revenue generators.
Right.
The second question, sports facilities might be your revenue driving
Right.
question.
Correct.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I'm going to jump in here quickly. On the previous comment about a community facility, I don't know if I'm getting too hung up on semantics because I've dealt in this world in the past, but does the recreation department charge fees for the use of the facility? So it's not generating a profit, it's just covering its maintenance and management costs.
It may cover some of that based on recreation fees, but it's not going to come anywhere near the operation maintenance for a community
Okay.
center.
Well, some sports are more revenue capable, I guess, is how I'd want to say it, I guess.
If you have community fields there that you can rent out to the soccer leagues, I do know that when they had the first recreation meeting, I think they said they spent $100,000 in Barnstable renting out fields. So there could be some money that gets done through the fields, but the community center itself, and you might be able to rent out some things for people, but I think it's meant really not to be a revenue generator, but more of a community amenity to benefit our town.
Okay.
Well, we haven't gotten into the economics of it in terms of finding out what actually is received in terms of monies. So that would be interesting, but for this purpose, perhaps it's not relevant.
Yeah, and I think that could be added as a prompt. So I think if the questions are coming up, I think we could put a prompt. That's what the prompts are intended to help for, is if just trying to anticipate some of the things that might come up. And I think that could be one is, someone says, well, don't we pay some fees for the recreational facilities? And so the prompt could be like, it does generate some revenue, but it's unlikely to cover the cost of building it.
Right.
And it doesn't usually cover the cost of all operations. But I think as we flip through, if we flip through the next couple, I think the other person mentioned how we do get to the other regional sports facility, which does lend itself a little bit more to kind of talking about the revenue generator. And
Right.
so I think, Liam, if you'll go to the next page, it should start at the top, sports facilities. So we try to acknowledge, because again, people will have this piece of paper in front of them. There was some support for multi-sport facility, both indoor and outdoor. And really there are two, based on the survey, there's really two main models. Town-owned for community use, which is that first section that we were talking about, or privately owned and regional. And so we're trying to acknowledge that there are some other recreational facilities with, in town, as well as the schools. And then there is this athletic fields analysis which exists. And then we get to the question. So, we understand that the town has some capital demands. Discussed previously, which of the following approaches would you recommend? And this is where we get to that question that I think you had, Sharon, which is talking about a facility that's paid for by the town and used by town residents. And we liken that to not be a big revenue generator. Or the second bullet is a public-private partnership, reduces some of the town's investment costs and generates tax revenue with some positive, economic impact, and providing the town needs at the same time. And then the last bullet is really that third level, which is like a privately owned facility, focused on more tax revenue and positive impacts. And there's this spin-off, so people would, at a regional facility, would be coming and they might stay at hotels and they might go to some businesses in town, and there would be that additional economic impact. So those are kind of the three levels that we're seeing come out of the survey. And trying to talk to people about what do they think is important, and there's kind of those three levels of options in question 4. And there's a typo, I can see it, so it's not question 54. It's question 5. Do you think the town should invest in the property and limit it to community facility, or try to generate tax revenue? And so it's the same type of question, just a different approach. And that's where we're trying to get people to engage in this discussion here, to find out, if the participants at the meeting, what are they feeling should be really an approach for the town in terms of the sports and recreation. Just looking at the prompts, we would expect traffic to come up, so traffic congestion would occur with both. But I think obviously it might be a little larger with a regional facility. For a community facility, we're expecting the town that the town might have to foot the bill for some of the potential improvements related to traffic if it's just town-owned facilities, versus, if it's a regional entity, there might be some private development money that would go into like creating turning. They might actually be obligated to provide turning lanes or improve intersections. And then I think that was the point of that last prompt there. So I don't know if there's other prompts here, but we feel like this is going to be a good conversation piece for the participants to really kind of grapple with and talk about the potential need for tax revenue versus the potential need for just community facilities. And then, yes.
No.
I
go
just
ahead.
have a quick question. Regarding the 3 options you just talked about, is a private nonprofit considered in those 3 categories, like whether, or is it just for profit when you go to the private facility? Just curious if that is one of the categories or can be included in one of your categories or not.
It's a good question.
To run the facility.
Yep. So if it were like, and I don't know if this is a good example for Cape, but like a Boys and Girls Club, like
Right.
I think that's a good question. We would. I think I'm just going to just have this. I'm thinking out loud, but I think like a nonprofit might expect to have either like a $1 lease on the property, or some other agreement with the town that they are providing kind of the services, but they will not have deep pockets. They won't have the ability they're unlikely to have the ability to build a very expensive new building. So they would be more on the lower scale of if the gymnasium were kept you know, like maybe they could have a lease agreement with the town for something like that. So I don't know. It's a good question, Joe. I don't know how to answer it off the top of my head, but
No, because you could get someone with big pockets willing to donate it, you name it after him. He forms a nonprofit board and he runs it.
Right.
That happened in my town growing up. So that's why I just brought it up to see if that was something,
The
some
Tony,
well-to-do person, community could make a nice donation or something. And
I think it would
but you have a
still fall.
nonprofit board.
Yeah,
The
I think
town,
it
the
would.
town would own the land, the town would help build it, but you'd have a nonprofit board run it.
I think it would fall roughly under the first bullet, which we had, which was a community scale use, which would still require some kind of financial investment from the town. Because I think if we were talking about the gymnasium, for example, there's going to be a pretty big price tag to renovate the gymnasium. So if there was a donor, that would be great. But then it's still this agreement where there would likely be some kind of lease agreement, and it would still be kind of community oriented. It wouldn't be generating that tax revenue that a regional facility would. But we can consider that, and maybe that's a prompt. Maybe that's a way that we could talk about it in the prompt. Or if you have another idea, if we want to add another bullet or add a nonprofit in parentheses to kind of acknowledge that that could be an option, we could do that as well.
It might come up just
Depends what
naturally,
the committee wants to do.
organically.
the,
Right, it could come up in discussion organically, it's true, yes.
on the Cape, the Tony Kent Arena was built as a nonprofit.
And what was that example, Sharon? Do you mind saying that again?
Tony Kent Arena
And what is that? Do you,
Hockey arena in
is it a place in
Dennis.
Yarmouth?
in Dennis.
Dennis,
It's an ice skating rink.
the ice skating rink in Dennis.
So the land was donated by the town of Dennis.
They come looking for money to maintain it.
We
Right.
provided
Yeah.
CPA funding, I think.
I think it falls under the community use, honestly, is that they would it would be unlikely for them to be, as a nonprofit, okay, so I'm walking this through myself. You know, it's a nonprofit organization, they would be unlikely to be paying taxes to the town. So it would be that scenario where the town is willing to, even like a ground lease, you know, like we're gonna donate this portion of the site for you to operate, but it's not gonna be a revenue generator. So I think it would still fall under the community scale.
Maybe not a bad
So-
idea to add it to a bullet point for like a
Okay.
prompt, you know, if the conversation lags as that topic is being covered, then people can re-energize with that as an option.
Okay. Yep, that's a perfect suggestion. So that would be a prompt. I think we would put that under the prompt. And I think we can look up the Dennis ice skating rink and just have that, you know, as one example. There's a nonprofit example, because most people, it sounds like they would be familiar with that out there. Maybe they've been there to go ice skating. Okay, that's very good. So I think if we go to the next one, the next topic area is housing. And we definitely want to talk about it. And it may be more of the difficult conversation that the group has, because it's one of those subjects, no matter where we go, talking about housing, you know, gets people interested for sure. So I think it's important, and we've now previewed the housing production plan. Has come up twice, kind of in the lead into this. But the town really has established a need for more housing for seniors and employees and a lot of different people at price points that's attainable. And so, you know, that's a phrase that we use so that we can get to workforce housing. It's people with fixed incomes. It's people who are renters. But the real goal, the housing crisis throughout Massachusetts, is really housing that's attainable at a price point. So given the town ownership, we do want to acknowledge that the town owns this large property, and it creates an important opportunity to use some of the property for housing. And so the question is, what are the advantages and drawbacks of emphasizing, for example, a recreational community use versus housing? So we want to engage people to talk about if they really feel like having recreational use over the entire property is of the utmost importance to them, or whether they think that sharing the property with any uses really, including housing, is viable in their minds to talk it through. So the critical need, and then I think the second bullet is that it'll be quick, but just to say that because the town owns it, they the town has a lot of control over what type of housing would occur there. And so that's a process, this request for proposals. It means that the town could look at the type of housing they really want and need, and they could articulate that this is the type of housing that we want to see developed here. And so there's amount of control, a lot more control than a private development that the town doesn't own the land. And then creation of affordable housing, and that has the capital A, does create opportunities for infrastructure, grants for infrastructure, and it doesn't necessarily come, there's not necessarily grants, infrastructure improvement grants for community recreational uses. We're just not seeing that in the state's programs. So just talking about that with people to see if there's any level of importance that people want to put there. And then, do you believe there's an opportunity to provide housing and another use on the site? Again, it's kind of the same question, just to make sure that we're asking it a different way, just to get people engaged in this conversation. The prompts, site's large, so they haven't done the map exercise yet, but we do want to at least have this verbal discussion first. And then I think, depending on how the conversation's going, you throw in the question about multifamily housing. If it were included or were considered, where would you think it would make sense? And have them kind of just talk through that. And then maybe it's repetitive, but if it hasn't really come up, the question about sewer. So, you know, the water supply land is in the vicinity. There could be an opportunity to bring sewer up to this parcel and help protect water supply by providing sewer. So those are some of the prompts and the discussions that we think could be helpful for people to talk about housing.
Again, I think.
Okay, and then,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No,
Yes.
I was just going to compliment you and your team in terms of the questions, so I think you do a really nice job. I thought you did a nice job with the local comprehensive plan, and so I do appreciate your ability to give relevant and good questions. There may be suggestions by any of the committee members, but I interrupted you. You were going to finish?
Yeah, that's okay, and I appreciate that. And I want to thank Kathy, because Kathy's been very helpful in helping us ground our questions in the Yarmouth specific thing. So we couldn't do it without Kathy. The last topic area here is open space. It's prevalent in the survey, but I think we have some questions about it. So to kind of navigate this, preserving the property for open space and water protection and adding trails was identified as the desired use of the property in the survey. The town owns several properties with existing trails in the vicinity. This might take, this might be something where this sentence actually might need to be amended a little bit, just because we've learned that the town owns several properties with existing trails, but it's not highly encouraged. I think the town is trying to discourage the use of trails on the water supply lands in particular. So that sentence might actually need to be tweaked a little bit.
Where are you,
But
Jeff?
then the question is really, would you support preserving most of the site as open space and trails if it required funding by the town and doesn't generate any tax revenue? I think that's really kind of a punchline that we see. The biggest contrast is if people are really pushing to support it for just open space, there would be a cost. There would be a cost to sort of naturalize that property. It's been pretty highly disturbed. And then build trails and parking lots and access. The Parker Rivers Landing is a good example of that. That's a concerted effort and a big investment. So the open space plan does identify that the current needs of the town to maintain what it already has for open space is possibly not being met. So I think that's important for people to consider. Adding more open space could exacerbate that. And then the town's process with the landing, so it took 10 years and required significant investment. The disturbance that already exists, and then I think the contrast with the last one is that a larger scale development could necessitate bringing sewer and that would be a benefit. I was trying to write that's a benefit of potentially sewering the project, is it would protect the groundwater drinking supplies. So I think with that I'll stop. I feel like I don't have a sense if the committee has questions or not.
Well,
There's two prompts there.
The third bullet, are you talking about Parker's River Landing when you say the property? that you are following number 2, which is about the Parkers River Landing,
Mattacheese
or are you
property.
talking about?
Yeah, no,
Mattacheese?
that's a good catch. I was talking about the Mattacheese property, and the third bullet is that the Mattacheese property is largely disturbed. I mean, there's some wooded areas, obviously, but when you look at the site as being 2 former schools with pavement and a lot of clearing, that technically that we would call that a disturbed site. So for the survey respondents who said we would love to just see this whole site be open space, it was just trying to acknowledge that that would take actually some effort to demolish all the buildings and restore a lot of the actual habitat that was once there.
Does any other member have a question about or suggestion for either improving or changing or doing anything with this number? Because it certainly is it can be taken a hard way. I went and looked at the Parkers River sheet that's in the Capitol, and it's $13,256,000 plus that they've spent on that project.
Yeah. We have $13.6 million in funding, and we're probably going to spend really close to that between soft costs, engineering,
Free
and
cash,
construction.
CEDC funds, state grants.
9.7 million in CPA funding. Thank you, Town of Yarmouth.
Yep. So you're talking, and I don't know if that could be added.
Well, it's definitely a good prompt, like as the conversation is happening, like we're not really, I don't think, in a spot where we're trying to dissuade or encourage any of everybody's participation at the workshop. But if you're in a group, it's to both sides of the coin. Like if you're in a group where everybody is like, has to be open space, that's the thing, and then you're like, devil's advocate, Parkers River Landing, 13 million, upkeep, open space, you know what I mean? Just to like try to get them to see the other side of things. But I think that's really the intent. I believe these questions, this facilitator's guide looks really great, and even though I won't be a part of the workshop, I think you guys have done a wonderful job of putting it together. My only edit that I'm going to, as putting in the minutes, is just on the agenda, the very first page of your facilitator's guide, is that the report out will be after the scenario planning. So steps
Yes,
3
good.
and 4. That's all
Good.
I'm gonna make a suggestion.
Good catch. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great catch.
We did switch that around.
Where are you?
And what I heard, sorry, just to touch base on this, what I heard is I think adding a prompt on this open space and recreation question, I think adding a prompt with some of those fact-based numbers for the cost of Parkers River's Landing, I think would be great to have as a prompt just to have on hand. It's again, I think you guys said it very eloquently, not to dissuade anyone, but it's just to make sure that we're having at least this, it's 10 minutes, so it's not an intensive conversation, but at least to have people acknowledge that there would be a pretty significant cost to create this as a new sort of, open space recreational amenity.
You already have it. I mean, you've already spent the 13 million to get a place to go and walk and see the beauty of marsh, et cetera. So, I don't know. It is, somebody mentioned to me, don't we have enough open space? I mean, I don't even want to be on camera saying that, but that's the reality of, and yet we've grown up with huge building and, residences and all of that as well. So it's a difficult subject, so, and for many people. And for many people in the survey, or some people in the survey, I shouldn't say many, but there are some people that they think they're losing Cape Cod, so.
It'll be interesting to see everybody's feedback after the workshop. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, that was in the capital, if you need it.
Yeah, I will look that up, and I think that's where I'll put it'll just be a bullet, so it'll be a prompt with those figures. I think that would be very valuable. And again, on the open space one, I think
And when did
there
it
would be
start?
one minor edit to the second sentence. So right now it says the town owns several properties with existing trails surrounding the property. sentence by itself is not very good, but I think it would be the town owns several, um, let me think about how I would say this, but I want to address the water supply land and that the trails are not formal trails by the town, right? So I think Kathy, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but I think we want to acknowledge that the town is not looking to encourage more trails on the water supply lands.
Oh, that's a definite. Lori, the water director, very definitely said it at the Open Space Water
Okay.
Committee. So that was said, that they do not want people on the trails in the water department land.
Don't want to
Yeah.
encourage it.
Because I think that honestly, in this topical discussion with the groups, I think that there might be some people who are going to be upset about that if they use those trails today, you know, if they're learning about that for the first time. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, you know, with that constraint, those surrounding areas are not going to be encouraged for trails. Making this as a trail network, you know, doesn't have as much viability
Right.
because the town's not going to want to encourage the connections to those adjacent trails.
But at the same point, they're not that far away from the bike trail,
Yeah.
and as you indicated earlier, so.
Correct.
No fun. Any other questions for Jeff? Well, Jeff, you've done it again. You've done a great job. And Heather has, you know, your whole company has done a great job. And we thank you very much.
Can we just,
Yeah.
well, before Jeff goes, maybe talk a little bit about the schedule in the next meeting?
Oh, absolutely.
I know that I had mentioned that to you, Jeff, and you were kind of going to talk to Heather about it when she gets back, but maybe just talking about it, oops, briefly while you're here. I think we're having this meeting, this workshop meeting. BSC Group usually does an excellent job of summarizing that, so it kind of gets all the flavors of everything. And I know you guys were talking about an August 11th meeting. Would that be a time to kind of review the workshop and see what happened and maybe give some guidance or some ideas or kind of what you guys are thinking for BSC Group? Because it looks like for a while there, they're going to be working on some conceptual designs, and you kind of might want to give them some feedback in order to move forward with that. So I don't know, Jeff, whether you can speak to that. That's really a Heather thing, but you guys typically do that nice summary of the workshop results, so to speak.
Yeah. I cannot speak for Heather, but what I think would be, I think what I see on the red line there is that you'd be proposing a mock meeting on August 11th. Is that the way that reads?
Yeah, I think that's
To-
what Sharon had been looking for.
Yeah.
She'd been looking for a room for the 11th, and the topic would basically be, in my opinion, what happened at the workshop.
Yeah, I mean, I professionally think that that's a good idea, and I think what I think is reasonable for us to produce is obviously a summary of the community meeting, and then I honestly think that we would have the bubble diagram. So that was the iterative process, is that we want to get the input from people, and it's kind of rough bubble diagrams, but I think on August 11th it could be good for us to present bubble diagrams to the committee, because that is the precursor to us, because it's a little bit of the level of effort to go to conceptual designs
Right.
is much higher. So we would want to probably present the bubble diagrams that we're able to generate to the committee on August 11th to show you that it would be part of the report to kind of show the evolution of how we get to the conceptual design. So I would hazard a guess to say that, yeah, I think the August 11th. What I don't know is if people are available. I don't know if Heather's available. I think I could be available as like a fill-in. So, Kathy, were you trying to cement this tonight? Did you kind of want to have the committee take a vote on that?
I think the committee was looking to maybe set some schedules and some rooms. We're just running into difficulty booking rooms
Right.
at Town Hall. Every single meeting room was booked here at Town Hall this evening. And I think we can have Conference Room A on August 11th.
Okay.
That's great.
So
I think
maybe,
we should do it. I'm speaking, firmly and candidly, but I can look at mine and Heather's schedule, and I think we're both available. And the assumption is that that's a virtual meeting, so I think we should do it. And I think it gives BSC group the opportunity to show this committee, that update, and then it leads us to go into that conceptual design phase. So I appreciate the suggestion.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else, Kathy, or?
I think if you're just looking at the schedule, you have another meeting on the 8th. That's a Monday. Obviously, room A is booked. I had mentioned to you that,
I have the DPW, it's already booked there.
awesome, okay, so that can remain.
And I'm available that night, for sure, so I'll be able to open the building.
September 8th,
That's September 8th.
yeah, and that's the
DPW
one
building.
in the building, the conference room in the building, or is that the?
DPW
The
building.
DPW,
building.
74 Town Brook Road, yeah.
Yeah, no, as opposed to the, where you had do storms, and lunch.
Oh, no, not in that room.
That's
We have a
too big.
meeting room that's similar to room A.
Yeah, okay,
Sorry, that's right, we went to the
Right,
recreation,
right.
sorry.
yeah,
And then the select board, they're not, if you look at their schedule, they're not meeting on the 16th, they're meeting on the 23rd, so I don't know whether that. And then you have another public meeting that's scheduled for October 15th. I don't know where that would be.
I
Hearing
have that
room.
reserved at the DPW also.
This is this is like
Oh, this is a
the
big
public
meeting?
meeting.
Oh, okay.
It needs to be
Is that-
recorded, and it needs to be, in my opinion, in the hearing room. That's the night that the planning board typically meets, so you might want to reconsider. And of course, I don't know BSC's schedule, but that's something that, it's a little ways out, but something to think about when you might want to schedule it. The following Wednesday would probably work.
well, the other thing we have is the capital committee, because there are two members.
That's
Our meetings are at
Mondays.
5 p.m. on Mondays, which the ones that we also follow, like the 8th, I'll leave when the meeting's done here and head to the DPW meeting, and if it runs long, then we will be late, but
Yeah,
we'll do our
Was there a reason Mondays was picked for the group? Do you need a Monday? Because Thursday, room A is always, there's nobody booked for room A on Thursdays.
well, that's why I was thinking that we may have to change our
Right, you
day.
may want to consider changing so that you can get as many members as
And then
possible.
therefore, the rooms would have to be double-checked with.
I don't think we knew that, that Thursday it was always
Yeah,
available.
I just looked today
Yeah.
and
Well,
or the other day.
originally, when I looked at the minutes finally that I got the transcript from, which was about our first meeting, we were gonna do Thursday. But then what
Interesting.
happened was a couple members were having difficulty with that day.
Well,
So we may need to take a vote. I think we're all set for our next meeting on the 11th.
can everyone attend, or is, you just made it
Virtual.
virtual? Okay.
I'm trying to look at your August is not a problem, right?
No, but I have a doctor's appointment that
Appointment.
evening.
Yeah.
So I'll join virtually.
Right.
But, yeah,
But,
on August 11th.
Okay. So that date would be okay, the August 11th. The question would become September 8th,
Right, or whether you want to change that to the 11th, which is Thursday.
Thursday, yeah. I'm okay with that. Would that, there's nothing that we need from BSC for that, is that correct?
I think they're going to be there. It's the discuss conceptual development process. So maybe because Heather's not here, we might not be able to solidify some of these things. So maybe we can we feel good about August 11th, and we'll just say that that's good for this evening and call it a
Right.
night. But it's something to think about as we're moving forward,
Right, but
some
I
of these
also
dates.
need two from our members as to, if we were to switch to Thursday, so we don't have these conflicts, is that a good day or a bad day for everybody?
Fine by me.
It's all over. I have board meetings that take me out of town, but it doesn't happen every week. So it's twice a month.
Well, so we're looking at having the September 8th meeting on the 11th. I think I can do that.
So why don't we take a vote on next meeting?
We can send an email out to the
Yep.
group. Are you good,
Joe,
Joe?
I'm sorry, how are you?
I can make the 11th.
Okay,
Of August.
Of
We're
August.
not talking about September. We're
Right.
August 11th. Conference room A, 6 p.m. Presentation of the workshop. Great.
Good summary?
Yes, got it.
Yeah, we're also talking about whether we could, Joe, whether we could change our day from Monday to accommodate capital and change it to Thursdays. Are Thursdays okay for muck meetings for you?
Yes,
I'm not 100% sure moving forward if Thursdays work for me.
Okay.
I can't
Well,
answer
then
that
maybe
question
if
tonight.
everybody can go back and check
Yeah.
their
Send
lives.
an email out and everyone can just respond to me if
Okay.
if it works
All
for
right.
you.
Sounds good. And thank you for getting the conference room.
Yeah. Yep.
But the meeting on the 11th would be at the DPW.
The meeting on August 11th would be
August
the
11th.
conference room A.
August is the DPW.
No,
I'm sorry,
August 11th is in conference room A
here,
at 6 PM.
9/11 is DPW.
possibly.
9/11 is to be determined.
Yeah,
Oh.
with Heather. in a-
9/11 to be,
So the only thing we have for sure is August 11th here, in A.
Yes.
And do you mind if I just confirm that, would you be okay if BSC is virtual for that August 11th meeting? I think that works. Then
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure we can do that, and
Yeah, we'd love to
regardless,
hear-
it will either be me or Heather.
Yeah.
But Heather's calendar looks clear. I put a hold on it, so I think
Little does
it's
she know.
reasonable to expect us to be both present
Well,
virtually.
that's good. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure, yep.
In the August meeting, we will have some kind of, maybe not a formal resolution of this, of the workshop, but a good,
Going to summarize the workshop and show the bubble diagram so you guys get a good idea. And then maybe you can give some input to BSC group as they move forward with the more detailed conceptual design options.
So, it appears you'd like to have a vote to accept?
Yeah, a vote to accept the, just so that we don't run into the same scenario we had before with changing things and running into open meeting law, if we can just kind of vote to approve the presentation and the facilitator guide, as amended throughout this meeting. And then also, are you comfortable with me putting like the survey results and once we get the finalized presentation, sometimes it's helpful if we can put that all on the website so people can look at it ahead of time and kind of get an idea of what's going to be asked of them.
so would you like me to make a motion on what you just said?
Yeah.
Right?
So moved. Okay.
Do we have a second?
Again,
second,
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, great,
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
thank you.
And thank you very much, Jeff, and the rest of the BSC group that were listening and participating.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and it's definitely a team effort. So Oxa put a lot of time in this.
Right.
Jeff looked at it. We even got Heather on vacation, so she saw the rough draft of this information too. So it's definitely a team effort, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Be
Jeff.
well rested.
We'll see you next July 15th.
Yep, we're all looking forward to being there. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So we're at that dilemma again where we've taken, be gone 8 o'clock, so, and I want to apologize for past problems in terms of keeping timely. We want to have a quick discussion about minutes, and then we've already had the discussion about next meetings, so we're going to leave that there. Are there any other member questions or comments? I am going to go back to minutes, so, yeah. And so that, once we have the discussion of minutes, we can adjourn, okay? So, I just recently received just to let you know, the November 6 transcriptions that Mary Alice just sent me that I had asked before and never received. So I'll look, once I find the November 6 minutes that were finally given to me, like in March or April, I forget when. I think it was on the April agenda for the first time. I just want to read the transcript and those minutes, because none of us were, no chair, no vice chair, no clerk or anything, so.
Were those minutes approved? Was there minutes for the 11th, 6th?
From the 6th, November 6th.
Yeah, okay.
I'm talking about those. Because I was told, here are the November 6th minutes, and it was on the April agenda. And I said, well, we've never seen these before. And so we had this long discussion. So that's when transcripts came up. So anyway, I don't want to make a big deal about it. I just want to get it done. And so I'm going to go find them again and then look at the transcript and see if there are any votes and just match that up. I don't think I could do what you asked Lindsay to do.
Okay, I copied you on that, right?
Yes, you
The
did.
example, okay.
Yeah, so, but I'll let you know what I
The
find.
key with minutes is you don't have to always be super detailed.
Right.
You can say, we discussed the survey and made recommended amendments to that BSC group is going to be incorporating into. If you can say such as and have a couple examples, that's great too, kind of gives people an idea and a flavor of it. But all the votes obviously need to be done, all the attachments need to be identified so that everyone in the public knows what you use to make in your deliberations.
Yeah, okay.
And then obviously present and all that kind of stuff. But the actual, do
Minutes.
the best you can.
Yeah.
Do the best you can.
Okay, well, I'm not as talented.
Transcripts are going to be 50 pages or something.
Oh, yes.
And lots of times there'll be like 3 pages and you can summarize that down into 1 sentence or 2 sentences.
Right, and that was just our introduction meeting anyway, so
I thought you had one set of minutes that were approved.
we've never approved any minutes because never have we
No?
had the minutes
Okay.
approved.
Okay. I don't remember, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What about these current minutes from July?
right, and now Lindsay's done such a nice job. If I could find and look, the only question I apologize to you, Lindsay, because,
Here's my copy.
thanks. I've got too many papers. Kathy's correction, were there any other corrections that you saw or needed to be done, or?
Me or Lindsay?
I have a different draft that I will, moving forward, I'll be going off of
Okay.
Kathy's sort of template.
Yeah.
But for June, I didn't really want to go back and redo anything from June 9th, so
Yeah.
moving forward, I will be
Yeah.
following more of
That's
the
okay.
template.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this particular one had, oh dear Lord. Sharon, if I could find mine, I marked it up. The only thing was, I think people heard, when I was asking about actually the oil tank, I was talking about two-liner, because Roby had talked about that the oil tank was a two-liner.
Double lined, yep.
Double liner.
Double walled, yep.
And so it wasn't that I was thinking there were two in the ground.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a double lined, and,
So you just want to say, it said, are there 2, it's are they double walled?
yeah, double, yeah. And that was the only correction there.
I can make that edit, if you guys vote to approve them as amended,
Yep.
and then I can get them, the vote added on here. and do
A
it.
motion to approve as amended.
Second? Anyone for second? Casey?
Second.
Yeah. All those approved, all those for approval?
Yep.
Barbara, were you okay with it?
Yep.
Yep. Everyone's okay? Joe?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Anybody opposed? So voted unanimously to approve as amended. All right. And then I'll be in touch about the November 6th, once I dig that all up, to you, Kathy. And
What do you need from me?
only just to review what, you've never seen them.
I've never, minutes, I swear, I thought there was some draft minutes of one meeting.
Right. November 6th of
Right, okay.
2024.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm gonna dig them out somewhere in my house and then take a look at the transcripts, which I just received, and just make sure that there weren't any votes.
Okay.
with that
We're gonna
kind of-
double check the draft that was done of that meeting.
Right, and
then
if
the
the
other
draft
ones.
is fine, I mean, I don't know who wrote them, but it was when they had 5 people that were doing this. I feel it's very unfair to Lindsay to have to do this, but she's a good sport to do it. So, thank you very much.
Oh, sure, someone can sub on days when I won't be in attendance,
Yeah,
but-
yeah,
or the AI can.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you. And then I do want to talk to you about the oil tank, but that'll be next week, Roby? Or if you're not, but you might not be here.
I'm definitely out of town on Wednesday all day and all day Thursday.
Okay,
But I'm around on Monday and Friday,
yeah,
and some of Tuesday.
all right. But it is double-lined?
I have not received confirmation from that, but I do believe it is. The school has the documentation of that, so I'll be able to pull that out.
Okay, thank you. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Approved.